The photographer called me and said he had noticed something very disturbing in the wedding photos. That single sentence, whispered over the phone, would unravel the tapestry of my life, thread by painful thread, exposing a truth I never wanted to see. If you enjoy stories about family secrets, shocking betrayals, and the strength it takes to reclaim your life, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to the channel and join me as I share a story I never thought I'd tell. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 68 years old. This story comes from my own life, a chapter I kept closed for a long time, but one that ultimately defined the woman I am today. The phone rang on a Tuesday, a sharp, intrusive sound in the quiet of my sunlit kitchen. I was wiping down the counter, the scent of lemon cleaner hanging in the air, looking forward to my weekly book club. I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something, a flicker of intuition perhaps, made me pick up. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" a man's voice asked, hushed and hesitant. "Yes, speaking." "This is David Chen. I was the photographer at your granddaughter Clara's wedding last month." His voice dropped even lower, as if he were afraid of being overheard. "I need to see you immediately. And please, come alone. Don't say anything to your family yet." The air in my kitchen suddenly felt thick, difficult to breathe. Clara's wedding had been the event of the season, a beautiful, lavish affair at the country club. My late husband Arthur would have been so proud. I'd poured a significant part of my savings into making it perfect for her. "David, what is this about?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Is something wrong with the photos?" "I can't explain over the phone," he said, his voice strained. "But I noticed something very disturbing while I was doing the final edits, something I don't think anyone else saw. It's serious, Mrs. Vance. Please, can you come to my studio downtown this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, began to pool in my stomach. "I'll be there," I heard myself say, my voice strangely calm. I hung up and stood motionless, staring out the window at my manicured garden. The roses were in full bloom, a riot of pink and red against the green lawn. Everything looked exactly as it should, yet the world felt off its axis. Something very disturbing. What could possibly be disturbing in wedding photos? Images of smiling faces, clinking glasses, my beautiful Clara radiant in her ivory gown. My daughter, Sarah, Clara's mother, chose that moment to breeze into the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, Melissa, I told her it has to be the peonies. Nothing else will do." She saw me and rolled her eyes dramatically, a silent commentary on the travails of planning her charity gala. She covered the receiver. "Mom, did you call the landscaper? The hedges look shaggy." Without waiting for an answer, she walked out, her conversation continuing. I looked at the space where she had been standing. At 50, Sarah still moved through my house, through my life, with a sense of unquestioned ownership. She'd been living with me for 3 years, ever since her third divorce was finalized. "Just temporarily, Mom, until I get back on my feet," she'd said. Her son, my grandson Leo, had followed a year later, after losing another job. "Just for a little while, Nana." Temporary had a way of becoming permanent in this house. I drove downtown, the familiar streets of our Connecticut town blurring past. David's studio was in a renovated brick wall, all exposed ducts and polished concrete. He met me at the door, a man in his late 40s with kind, anxious eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Vance," he said, locking the door behind me. The click echoed in the quiet space. The walls were lined with beautiful, happy faces, other people's perfect days. "Please, just show me, David." He led me to a large monitor. "I was compiling the final album," he began, his fingers trembling slightly as he tapped the keyboard. The screen filled with images from the wedding. Clara walking down the aisle, the exchange of vows, the first dance. Everything was beautiful, exactly as I remembered. "These are the shots everyone saw," he said softly. Then he opened a new folder. "I was there early before the ceremony, taking establishing shots of the venue, testing the light. I took these from a second-floor window that overlooks a secluded part of the garden." He clicked, and a new image filled the screen. My breath caught in my throat. It was my grandson, Leo. He was in his wedding party tuxedo, but his bow tie was undone, his jacket unbuttoned, and he wasn't alone. He was locked in a passionate, desperate embrace with a blonde woman in a pale blue bridesmaid's dress. It was Jessica, Clara's maid of honor, and her best friend since childhood. The world tilted. I gripped the back of David's chair to steady myself. "There's more," David whispered, his voice thick with pity. He clicked through a sequence of photos. Different angles, same scene. Leo's hand tangled in Jessica's hair. Jessica's face, etched with an emotion that was far more than friendly affection. In one shot, you could see the timestamp on a clock in the background of the venue. It was 45 minutes before the ceremony was due to start. How long before the ceremony?" I managed to ask, my voice a dry rustle. "The metadata confirms it. 43 minutes before the processional began." He pulled up a technical screen filled with numbers and codes I didn't understand. "It's all verifiable, Mrs. Vance. This is real." I stared at the frozen image on the screen. Leo and Jessica. My grandson and my granddaughter's best friend. Betraying her not in some seedy motel weeks later, but in the very garden where she would, less than an hour later, pledge her life to another man. The sheer audacity of it, the cruelty, made me dizzy. David handed me a small flash drive. I made a copy of everything. The original files, the metadata, it's all here. I didn't know what else to do. I took the drive. It felt heavy in my palm, a tiny, cold weight containing a world of pain. "You did the right thing, David. Thank you." The drive home was a haze. I saw nothing, heard nothing. My mind was a roaring chaos of that single image. Leo. My Leo. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the young man I'd helped through college. Who could he? And Jessica. Clara had been her rock through her parents' ugly divorce. She'd called Clara her sister. I walked back into my house. The hollow feeling from the studio had expanded, becoming a vast, empty space inside my chest. Sarah was in the living room, feet up on my antique ottoman, scrolling through her tablet. "Where'd you run off to, Mom? I need you to look at these centerpiece options. The florist is driving a hard bargain." Leo wandered in from the kitchen, eating a sandwich. "Hey, Nana, what's up?" I looked at them, my daughter, my grandson, living in my home, spending my money, surrounded by the comfort and security I provided. And I saw the ghosts of the people in those photographs hovering behind them. The liars, the betrayers. I had thought the photographer's call was about a technical flaw, a blurry image, a photo bomber. I never imagined it would reveal a fundamental flaw in the very heart of my family. The foundation upon which I had built my life, my sense of self, my legacy, had just been exposed as rotten. And I knew with a chilling certainty that this was only the beginning, the first crack in the dam, and I was standing directly in the path of the flood. I moved through the rest of the day like a ghost in my own home. Sarah's chatter about floral arrangements and Leo's complaints about his latest job interview were just distant, meaningless noises. The image of that clandestine embrace was seared onto the back of my eyelids, playing on a relentless loop every time I blinked. I felt a physical sickness, a churning in my gut that had nothing to do with the untouched salad I pushed around my plate at dinner. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the worn armchair in my bedroom, Arthur's chair, staring into the darkness. The flash drive sat on the nightstand beside me, a tiny malevolent presence. 43 minutes before the ceremony. The calculation was as cruel as it was simple. He had held her, kissed her with a desperate intensity, and then, less than an hour later, he had stood at the altar as a groomsman, smiling as his sister married the man she loved. He had toasted their happiness. He had danced with the bridesmaids. The performance was monstrous in its perfection. And Jessica, sweet-faced Jessica who had cried genuine tears during the ceremony, were they tears of joy or of guilt and heartbreak? Had she looked at Clara, so innocent and trusting in her white dress, and felt any shred of remorse? The questions circled like vultures, picking at the carcass of my peace. A darker, more terrifying question began to form in the quiet hours past midnight. Did Clara know? The thought was a fresh wave of nausea. Was it possible my granddaughter was aware of this betrayal and had chosen to marry Peter anyway? The wedding had been her dream, meticulously planned for over a year. Had she been so determined to have the perfect day that she was willing to overlook the perfect betrayal happening in the garden? Or, a voice whispered from the deepest, most cynical part of my soul, was there another reason? A more practical, more mercenary reason to go through with a lavish wedding, regardless of the secrets festering beneath the surface. The next morning, I feigned a migraine. I stayed in my room until I heard Sarah's car pull out of the driveway for a Pilates class and Leo leave for a networking breakfast I was certain would be held at a sports bar. The house was finally blessedly silent. I went to the small oak desk where I kept my household accounts, the same desk where Arthur had once balanced the books for his small architecture firm. With a sense of grim purpose, I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet for the wedding expenses. I had been so happy to do it, to give Clara the day she wanted. I had dipped deep into the savings Arthur and I had so carefully built, telling myself he would have wanted this for his only granddaughter. $72,000. The number stared back at me. Venue, catering, the 5-tiered cake, the band, the flowers, David's photography fee. Every line item was a memory, now tainted. But one detail suddenly stood out sharp and glaring. Clara had been adamant about one thing: no traditional registry. "Grandma, we don't need another toaster," she'd said with a laugh. "We're starting our life together. Cash gifts are so much more practical. It gives us flexibility." At the time, I thought it was modern and sensible. Now the word flexibility took on a sinister new meaning. I remembered the gift table at the reception, a mountain of envelopes. Clara had hired a discreet, efficient woman specifically to collect, count, and secure them. A week after the wedding, Clara had called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. "You won't believe it, Grandma. Everyone was so generous. We got over $50,000. It's such a blessing for our future." I wrote that number down on a fresh sheet of paper. $50,000. Then I remembered my own gift to the newlyweds, a check for $25,000. "For your down payment," I told Peter, clasping his hand. He had smiled, a wide, grateful smile. "Thank you, Eleanor. This means the world to us. We won't forget this." $75,000. A small fortune handed to a couple just starting out.
A couple where the bride's brother was intimately involved with the bride's best friend in the shadows of the wedding venue. Why? The question was a drumbeat in my skull. Why go through with such an expensive public charade?
I needed air. I needed to get out of this house that suddenly felt like a gilded cage. I drove to the bank, the one where Arthur and I had been customers for 40 years. The manager, Susan Albright, greeted me with a warm smile. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you. What can I help you with today?" I forced a smile, my face feeling like a stiff mask. "I just wanted to verify that a check I wrote for the newlyweds cleared properly, Susan. A wedding gift. I'm old-fashioned. I like to see it in writing." Of course, her fingers danced across the keyboard. "Yes, here it is. Made out to Peter and Clara Evans. Cleared and deposited into their joint account without a problem." "Joint account," I repeated, keeping my tone light, conversational. "I'm glad they were so organized. When did they open that? Do you know? Before or after the engagement?" Susan scrolled. "Let's see. Looks like they opened it about 6 weeks ago, May 12th. 6 weeks before the wedding. Not when they got engaged 9 months prior, not when they moved in together. 6 weeks before the ceremony. They had opened a joint account specifically to receive the wedding money. It was a planned, coordinated financial maneuver. This wasn't the fog of romance. This was the cold, clear calculus of logistics. The drive home was a blur of green lawns and sprawling colonial houses, a picture of suburban tranquility that felt like a lie. I pulled into my driveway, the weight of my discoveries pressing me down into the seat. The house loomed before me, beautiful, peaceful, a testament to a life well lived. But it was also the headquarters of a conspiracy I was only just beginning to understand. I entered through the kitchen, hoping to slip upstairs unnoticed. But then I heard it. Sarah's voice, carrying down from the second-floor landing. She was on the phone, her volume too loud as always, believing herself to be the only person in the universe. "I know, it's perfect. Leo and I can easily stretch this another 8 months. By then, Mom'll be so worn down, she'll buy us that townhouse just to get some peace and quiet." I froze, my hand on the banister, my heart hammering against my ribs. A tinny, familiar voice responded through the speaker. "Clara." "Perfect. I just have to play happy wife for a little while longer, then I file. Half of those gifts are legally mine here in Connecticut, you know. Peter already agreed to a 60-40 split. Easiest 30 grand I'll ever make." The floor seemed to drop out under me. I gripped the banister to keep from falling. Sarah laughed. "And his little side piece doesn't even have a clue about the plan, does she? This is brilliant. Mom is so busy feeling proud of your picture-perfect marriage, she doesn't see a thing." "Just keep her distracted," Clara instructed, her voice cool and strategic. "Make her think you need something big. That way, when I ask her to help with our down payment, it won't seem so outrageous by comparison." "Already on it. I asked her for a new car yesterday. She looked annoyed, but she'll come around. She always does." I backed away, silent and careful, each step a monumental effort. I retreated to my room, closed the door, and leaned against it, my entire body trembling. The revelations came not as single drops, but as a tidal wave, drowning me in their icy truth. 2 granddaughters, both lying, both using me. One planning a fraudulent divorce to embezzle wedding gifts. The other, my own daughter, squatting in my house, running out the clock until I bought her a condo. Playing happy wife, easiest 30 grand I'll ever make. I had been their willing, blind financier. I had almost written that check for Clara's down payment. I had almost agreed to Sarah's new car. I had been moments away from funding my own systematic exploitation. The hollow feeling in my chest was gone,
replaced by a solid, burning core of resolute. I sat down at my desk, the same desk where I'd first seen the wedding budget, and I opened my laptop. My fingers, which had trembled moments before, were now steady. I opened a search engine and typed 2 words that would change everything: estate lawyer. The name that stood out was Alistair Croft. His firm specialized in elder law, trusts, and asset protection. The reviews used words like pitbull and unshakable. That was what I needed. I called, my voice surprisingly steady, and secured an appointment for the next morning. I spent the evening assembling my evidence with a methodical coldness that felt foreign to me. I printed the most damning of David's photographs, the one where Leo's face was clearly visible, consumed with a passion that was not for his sister's happiness. I wrote down the timeline, the dollar amounts, the quotes I'd overheard verbatim. Easiest 30 grand I'll ever make. Stretch this another 8 months. I copied the metadata from the flash drive onto a separate document. I was building a case, not for a court of law, but for a war of attrition I now knew was coming. The next morning, I dressed with care. A simple navy dress, pearls, my posture straight. I was not a victim going to plead for help. I was a client going to secure a general. Alistair Croft's office was in a modern building in Stamford, all cool glass and steel. His corner office was a testament to quiet success. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows, shelves lined with legal volumes. He was a man in his late 60s, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and a handshake that was firm and brief. "Mrs. Vance," he said, gesturing to a leather chair, "please, sit. Your call intrigued me." I placed my manila folder on his immaculate desk. "A month ago, I paid $72,000 for my granddaughter's wedding," I began, my voice even. "3 days ago, the photographer showed me pictures of my grandson and the maid of honor in a compromising situation 43 minutes before the ceremony began. Yesterday, I discovered the marriage was a premeditated scheme to collect cash gifts, with a planned divorce and a pre-negotiated split of the proceeds." I slid the folder toward him. Alistair Croft didn't flinch. He opened it, his eyes scanning the photograph, then the handwritten quotes. He spent a long moment looking at the metadata printout. "When you say discovered," he said, his pen poised over a legal pad, "you have direct evidence of this collusion." I overheard my daughter, Sarah, on the phone with my granddaughter, Clara. The quotes are exact. Clara stated she was playing happy wife for 2 more months before filing for divorce, that half the gifts were legally hers, and that Peter had agreed to a 60-40 split. Sarah was complicit, discussing strategies to manipulate me into funding their separate living arrangements. He made a note, a single sharp underline. "And your daughter and grandson currently reside with you?" "For 3 and 4 years, respectively. No lease, no rent. They refer to my home as a temporary situation while they get on their feet, a process that involves constant demands for money." I pushed a sheet of paper toward him. "This is a summary of the financial gifts I've provided them in the last year alone." Alistair reviewed it, his expression granite. "Mrs. Vance, in Connecticut, the law is clear. Your home is your separate property. Without a written rental agreement, your daughter and grandson are licensees, not tenants. You have the right to revoke that license at any time. The standard notice for a licensee to vacate is a reasonable period, typically considered to be 30 days. It is a courtesy, not a negotiation." A fissure of relief cracked open the ice in my chest. A courtesy, not a negotiation. "And the larger issue?" I asked, my gaze steady. "My assets, my will. I do not want them inheriting a single blade of grass from the life Arthur and I built. They have made it abundantly clear that I am a resource, not a person." "Then we make you a fortress," he said simply. He pulled a heavy text from his shelf. An irrevocable trust. We transfer your primary residence, your financial accounts, your investments, everything into a trust managed by an independent trustee. You retain full control and use of all assets during your lifetime. Upon your death, distribution follows the instructions laid out in the trust document, which can be designed to leave them the minimum required by Connecticut law, often nothing at all if other heirs are named. It is vastly more difficult to challenge than a will. How soon? The words were barely a whisper. We can begin today. My fees for the eviction notices, the will revision, and the complete trust creation will be $9,500. I thought of the $72,000 wedding, the $25,000 check, and the tens of thousands siphoned by Sarah and Leo. That is acceptable.
The silence behind my bedroom door was a fragile bubble in a sea of chaos. Sarah's weeping turned into ragged, angry sobs, and Leo's voice was a low, continuous rumble of profanity. I could hear him pacing, his heavy footsteps a violent counterpoint to the delicate chime of the grandfather clock in the hall. I sat at my vanity, not seeing my reflection, but listening. This was the first shockwave, the raw, unfiltered reaction. I knew it would soon crystallize into strategy. Within 10 minutes, the shouting subsided, replaced by the intense, sibilant whisper of a hissed argument. Then Sarah's voice, pitched high with panic. "Clara, it's Mom. He's lost his mind. He gave us eviction papers. 30 days." I pressed my ear closer to the door, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. A pause. Clara's response was a tinny, distorted buzz from the phone speaker, but the tone was clear, not shocked, but calculating. "I don't know what happened," Sarah whined. "He was just cold, like we were strangers." Another pause, longer this time. Clara was issuing instructions. "Okay. Yes, tomorrow. Bring Peter. We'll figure this out." Sarah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. "He's going to regret this." I moved away from the door, the threat hanging in the air. It was no longer just my problem children in the next room. It was a coordinated unit regrouping. I opened my laptop. An email from Alistair Croft was waiting, sent that afternoon. Draft trust documents, asset transfer forms. They thought this was about the house. They had no idea I was fortifying the entire kingdom. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Clara. "Grandma, Mom called me. We need to talk. Coming over tomorrow with Peter. This has gone too far." I read it twice. The cavalry was being summoned. Let them come. I opened my calendar and marked the date. Day 1 of 30. The clock was officially ticking. The next 2 weeks were a master class in psychological warfare. The initial shock gave way to a rotating carousel of tactics, each more transparent than the last. It began with manufactured illness. I came down to the kitchen on Saturday to find Sarah draped across the sofa, a washcloth on her forehead. "Mom," she moaned, her voice theatrically weak. "My blood pressure, the stress from this. I think you should call Dr. Evans." Steve stood sentinel nearby, arms crossed. "See what you've done?" I walked past them to the coffee maker. "There's aspirin in the bathroom cabinet," and took my mug to my room. Then came the threats delivered by Leo in the garage, his body blocking the doorway. "You know what people will say, right?" he snarled, his face too close to mine. "That you're a bitter old woman who threw out her pregnant daughter." Sarah wasn't pregnant. It was a desperate, pathetic lie. "Your bridge club, your garden society, they'll all know what kind of monster you really are." I checked my watch. "You have 28 days left. Now move." We stood in a silent standoff for a full 30 seconds, his jaw working, before he finally, reluctantly, stepped aside. By day 7, the bargaining started. A handwritten proposal appeared on the kitchen counter.
Leo's sloppy script outlined a can't-miss investment in a crypto scheme. Initial capital required $50,000. The terms? They would stay, paying a nominal rent of $400 a month. I read the entire delusional document and then walked into the living room where they sat watching me with hopeful, greedy eyes and handed it back. No. Sarah's face crumpled. We're trying to meet you halfway. No, I repeated and went back to my room with my book. They were predictable, using a playbook I had finally learned to read. But the dinner with Clara and Peter was the main event, and I knew I had to be ready. They arrived on Wednesday, as announced. Clara carried bags of groceries. We're cooking tonight, Grandma. You worked too hard. She was all brittle cheer. Peter smiled, that wide, easy smile that had once charmed me. Eleanor, hope you don't mind us barging in. Clara was worried. He shook my hand, his grip firm, confident. They moved through my kitchen with a sense of purpose, a staged performance of domestic normality. Sarah emerged, makeup flawless, her illness miraculously cured. Leo played the part of the reasonable, concerned grandson. We sat down to the meal they had prepared. The conversation was light, artificial. Then Clara set down her fork. Grandma, this house must be so much for you to manage alone. All these rooms, the stairs, the yard. Have you thought about downsizing? A lovely modern condo?
Peter nodded, picking up the thread seamlessly. The market is incredibly strong right now. Houses in this neighborhood are selling for a fortune. You could lock in your financial security, set everyone up comfortably. There it was, the real play. They didn't just want rent-free lodging for Sarah and Leo. They wanted the capital. They wanted me to liquidate the life Arthur built and hand them the proceeds. Clara touched the silver frame on the side table, a picture of her as a child on my lap, a territorial gesture. We'd help you move, of course, and whatever you got from the sale, it would be nice to share it with family. Help Mom and Leo get a fresh start. Help Peter and me with the down payment on our forever home. Everyone benefits. I looked at each of them, the 4 faces, 4 masks, one unified agenda, my money. I set my own fork down carefully. I'm not selling my house. Clara's smile tightened. Grandma, no one's pressuring you. We're just concerned. Thank you for your concern, I said, standing. I'm fine. Good night. I walked out. Behind me, the silence was louder than any explosion. Then the frantic, hushed whispers began. I didn't wait. I went to my room, grabbed my phone, and dialed Alistair Croft's cell. I need to see you tonight. It's urgent. I'll be at the office in 30 minutes. I waited until I heard their cars leave, Clara's little BMW, then Leo's beat-up Jeep following, a convoy of conspirators. Then I drove downtown. In his office, under the harsh fluorescent lights, I was blunt. They're coordinating. The eviction triggered their endgame. Tonight was a reconnaissance mission. They want me to sell the house and split the proceeds. Alistair didn't seem surprised. Then we accelerate the trust. We move everything, house, accounts, investments, into the irrevocable structure immediately. You maintain control, but after death, it follows your instructions to the letter. They cannot challenge it. They cannot touch it. How fast? I'll start the final paperwork tomorrow. We'll also change all your bank account beneficiaries today. Remove them entirely. Do it. He pulled up forms on his computer. Beneficiary change authorizations. Trust execution documents. I signed everything, my hand steady. The electronic signatures flashed on the screen, witnessed and legal. It was done. In 40 minutes, I left his office with copies of everything. The drive home felt different, lighter. The battle was still raging, but I had just secured the ultimate victory. The foundation was poured. The walls were going up.
They were still outside, planning their assault, not realizing the fortress was already complete.
The final 2 weeks were a descent into open hostility. The masks were off, the performances abandoned for raw animosity. The house, once a place of quiet, if strained coexistence, became a war zone of passive-aggressive skirmishes and overt sabotage. Day 2 of the final countdown, I walked into the kitchen to find my ceramic canister set, a wedding gift to Arthur and me 50 years ago, shattered on the tile floor. Leo sat at the table, a bowl of cereal before him. "Whoops," he said without looking up. "Slipped. Accidents happen." I didn't respond. I simply fetched the dustpan and brush, swept up the fragments of my past, and dumped them in the trash. 10 days, I said, my voice flat as I walked out. Day 4, I saw Sarah through the window, leaning over the back fence, talking to our neighbor, Helen. Sarah was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking with manufactured sobs. I couldn't hear the words, but the performance was clear. The victimized daughter, cast out by her cruel, unstable mother. Helen looked uncomfortable, patting Sarah's arm awkwardly before retreating into her own house. Let her play for the neighbors. It changed nothing. Day 7 brought the most audacious tactic yet. Jacqueline arrived with a stern-looking woman in a severe pantsuit. "Grandma, this is Dr. Irwin. She's a geriatric specialist. We're all so worried about these sudden, rash decisions. We thought it might help to have a professional assessment." The woman offered a thin, professional smile. "Mrs. Vance, your family is concerned about your capacity to manage your affairs. Sudden paranoia, cutting off loved ones, these can be signs of stop." I looked at Clara, my voice ice. "Get out. Both of you. Now." "Grandma, she's just trying to help." "This is my house. You are leaving." They left. Clara's face a mask of furious frustration. Day 10, I came home from the grocery store to find my bedroom door slightly ajar. I always closed it completely, a habit born from a lifetime of needing one sacred, private space. On my desk, the thick packet of trust documents from Alistair sat exactly where I'd left it. Almost exactly. The corner was bent at a different angle. The pages had a faint, disturbed look. Someone had been through them. That evening, Sarah was silent, her face pale. Leo kept glancing at her, his expression grim. The final desperate hope that this was a bluff had been extinguished. They knew. The trust was real. The money was gone. Day 12 brought the last, most polished performance. A soft knock on my door in the afternoon. Just Sarah, alone. "Mom, can we talk? Just us?" I gestured to the chair. She sat, a tissue already clutched in her hand, her eyes expertly red-rimmed. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice trembling. "You were right. About Leo. About everything. The way we've been living. He's not a good influence on me. I see that now." She leaned forward, her posture the very picture of vulnerable sincerity. "I've made terrible mistakes. I'm begging for your forgiveness. Just one more chance. I can change. I can be the daughter you deserve." It was flawless. Every tremor, every tear was perfectly placed, a masterclass in manipulation, honed over 50 years. I let the silence stretch, watching her, seeing the calculation behind the tears. "If you had truly realized your mistakes, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet and utterly devoid of warmth,
You wouldn't have come here asking for forgiveness as a transaction. You'd have come without expecting anything in return. But you're asking for the house, for the money, for me to dismantle the trust. The tears vanished. Her face hardened, the vulnerability snapping away like a switched-off light. Fine, fine. You want to be alone? Be alone. But when you're lying on the floor after a fall and there's no one here to help you, don't you dare call me. I didn't stand. I didn't react. 8 days, Sarah. Start packing. She stood and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the framed picture of Arthur on the wall rattled. The 30th day dawned clear and bright. I pulled into my driveway at 10 o'clock, right on schedule. A Maricopa County Sheriff's cruiser pulled in behind me, followed by Alistair Croft's sedan. We had coordinated this. Official, legal, final. Deputy Miller, a woman with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor, stepped out. Mrs. Vance, we're here to execute the writ of possession. Alistair joined us, his briefcase in hand. Everything is in order. We walked to my front door, my property, but I knocked anyway. 3 firm, solid raps. Silence. Then Leo's voice, muffled and defiant. Get away.
Deputy Miller stepped forward. This is Deputy Miller with the Sheriff's Office. I am here to enforce a court-ordered eviction. Open the door now, or I will be forced to open it for you. Your choice. A long, tense pause. A whispered, frantic argument from inside. Then the lock clicked and the door swung open. Sarah stood there, her face a mess of smeared makeup and real, this time, tears of rage. The living room behind her was a disaster zone of clothes, empty food containers, and general desolation. No boxes were packed. You have 2 hours to collect your personal belongings, clothes, toiletries, personal items. No furniture. The clock starts now, Deputy Miller stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. 2 hours? Sarah shrieked. We can't possibly. You've had 30 days, ma'am. 2 hours is a courtesy. What followed was a chaotic slow-motion collapse. Sarah frantically throwing armfuls of designer clothes into black trash bags, her sobs now those of genuine panic. Leo stomping through the house, cramming his belongings into duffel bags with violent, jerky movements. After everything we did for you, he muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Living in this big, empty museum all by yourself, you'll die alone in here. Deputy Miller's head snapped up. Sir, I suggest you focus on the task at hand and keep your comments to yourself. I stood in the doorway, a silent witness. I didn't help. I didn't speak. I simply watched the end of their 4-year occupation. Finally, the last bag was hauled out and thrown into the trunk of Sarah's overstuffed car. At the driver's side door, Sarah turned for one last venomous look. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice raw. When you're old and helpless and there's no one to wipe the drool from your chin, don't you dare come crying to us. I met her gaze, calm and certain. I won't. They drove away, the car disappearing down the tree-lined street, taking the chaos, the demands, and the profound sense of entitlement with them. I stood in my doorway, my house, truly, completely mine for the first time in years. Deputy Miller handed me the final paperwork. They're officially out. If they return, call 911 immediately. It'll be criminal trespass. Alistair shook my hand. Well done, Eleanor. Most people cave. You held the line. After they left, I walked slowly through the empty rooms. The living room where Leo had sprawled, the kitchen where Sarah had made her endless demands, the upstairs where they had treated my generosity as their royal due. The silence was profound. It was not an empty silence. It was a clean, peaceful, and deeply earned one. The war was over. I had reclaimed my home, my peace, and my life.
The silence, when it finally settled, was not an absence but a presence. It was a clean, expansive thing that filled the rooms, soothing the walls that had absorbed years of tension and noise. For the first few days, I simply existed within it, moving through my routines like a convalescent rediscovering the use of their limbs. I made tea and drank it while it was still hot, without interruption. I sat in Arthur's chair in the living room and read a book from beginning to end in a single afternoon. The only sound, the soft turn of a page. 3 weeks after the eviction, I was on the back terrace with my morning coffee, watching the early sun gild the autumn leaves. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. My phone sat beside me, and for the first time in memory, its silence was a comfort, not a judgment. It buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but a cold curiosity made me look. Eleanor, it's Samuel. I saw the photos. I know you know. Look, Clara knew about my relationship with Jessica the whole time. This whole marriage was an arrangement from the start. We're divorcing anyway. I'm asking you to stay out of it. I can make it worth your while. $15K to let this play out quietly. I read the message once, my hand perfectly steady. So Clara had known. The entire beautiful, tearful $72,000 wedding had been a coordinated business transaction between two cynical partners. Samuel, now panicking, was trying to bribe me into silence to ensure his smooth, profitable exit. $15,000, the price of my complicity in their fraud. I deleted the text. Then I blocked the number. I felt no anger. Only a distant, profound pity for the small, grubby people they had chosen to become. The fallout continued in these small, distant tremors. Sarah called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail and deleted the messages without listening. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she and Leo had rented a cramped two-bedroom apartment across town. Leo had finally taken a steady, if low-paying job. They were, for the first time in years, being forced to live within their own means. The thought brought me no pleasure, only a sense of grim validation. Clara called once, her voice sharp with entitled fury. "Grandma, I need help with a legal retainer for the divorce. Just $20,000. You owe me that much after what you've put me through." I had said a single, simple word. No. Then I had hung up. The power in that small syllable was more potent than any argument. I stood and walked back into the house. It was time to stop merely reclaiming my space and start actively building my life within it. On my desk, next to the finalized trust documents from Alistair Croft, was a brochure for the local community center. I'd circled a watercolor painting class for beginners. I'd always wanted to learn, but there had never been time. Or rather, I had never made the time, always prioritizing the needs of others above my own quiet desires. The doorbell rang, a cheerful chime that no longer sparked a knot of dread in my stomach. I answered to find a delivery man holding a long, flat box for Eleanor Vance. I brought it inside and opened it on the living room floor. Inside was a beautiful beginner's guitar, its wood glowing with a soft, honeyed light. I ran my fingers over the smooth neck, a smile touching my lips. My first lesson was on Thursday. Later that afternoon, I sorted through a box of old photographs I'd kept stored in the attic. I wasn't looking for punishment or nostalgia, but for context. I found one of Arthur and me, taken in our first home, our faces bright with hope and shared ambition. I found another of the girls when they were small, Sarah holding a toddler Clara's hand, both of them grinning with ice cream smeared on their chins. They hadn't been monsters then. They had just become users, and I had allowed it. mistaking provision for love and obligation for family. I placed the photo of Arthur and me on the mantelpiece. The others I put back in the box. I was not erasing the past. I was simply choosing which parts of it to build my future upon. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized but hadn't expected to see. David Chen, the photographer.
"Eleanor," he said, his voice hesitant, "I hope you don't mind me calling. I I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I was hoping, perhaps, you might let me buy you a cup of coffee sometime. I'd like to know that you're all right." There was no agenda in his voice, no calculation, just a simple human kindness and a shared understanding of a difficult truth. "I'd like that, David," I said, and I meant it. "Next week?" "Next week sounds perfect." After we hung up, I remained on the terrace as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. I thought of the long, painful journey from that first shocking phone call to this moment of quiet contentment. The evidence, the lawyer, the eviction, the final, ugly confrontation. Each step had been necessary, each boundary essential. My family believed I had chosen loneliness over love. They were wrong. I had chosen self-respect over their version of love, which was merely exploitation in a sentimental disguise. I had chosen peace over perpetual obligation. I had chosen the hard, clean truth over a comfortable, soul-destroying lie. The phone sat silent. The house was still. A guitar waited to be played. A blank canvas awaited its first brushstroke. A life, my life, built not on the quicksand of other people's demands, but on the solid foundation of my own choices, waited to be lived. They were learning to solve their own problems, and I, at 68, was finally learning to live my own life. The silence around me was no longer empty. It was full of promise. The first frost of the season silvered my lawn, and with it came a clarity that felt as sharp and clean as the morning air. The guitar lessons were proving to be a greater challenge than I had anticipated, my fingers fumbling on the frets, but the frustration was an honest one, born of learning, not of dealing with duplicity. The simple C chord I finally managed to play, however haltingly, was a triumph that belonged entirely to me. It was on one such morning, as I was practicing my scales, that the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Setting the guitar aside, I felt not a flicker of the old anxiety, only a mild curiosity. Through the peephole, I saw a woman, her back to me, her posture stiff. It took me a moment to recognize the tailored wool coat. Clara. I opened the door. She turned, and I was struck by how tired she looked. The polished corporate gloss was gone, replaced by a pinched tension around her mouth. She held a large manila envelope. "Grandma," she said, her voice devoid of its usual performative warmth. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the space as if taking inventory. She noticed the guitar propped on the stand, the open book of sheet music on the coffee table. Her gaze lingered there for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before she turned to me. "I'm not here to fight," she began, placing the envelope on the table. "I'm here to make you an offer, a business proposition." I remained standing, waiting. "The divorce is final," she said, the words clipped. It was messier than anticipated. Peter fought the 60-40 split. His lawyer brought up the photographs. A muscle in her jaw twitched. In the end, with legal fees,
I walked away with significantly less than planned. I said nothing. The silence pressed on her. This envelope contains a notarized affidavit. In it, I state that I had no prior knowledge of Peter's infidelity, that I was a devastated and betrayed wife, and that the marriage was entered into in good faith. It effectively neutralizes the evidence you have. In return, you will sign over a one-time payment of $50,000. This severs all future financial expectations. You get to keep your pristine version of events, and I get the capital I need to truly start over. I looked at my granddaughter. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me not angry, but profoundly sad. Even in defeat, even when coming to me with her hand out, she was trying to manipulate, to deal, to turn truth into a transaction. Or, I asked, my voice quiet. Or, she said, her eyes hardening, I will file a lawsuit against you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I will testify that you, a bitter, lonely old woman, fabricated this sordid tale and used doctored photographs to destroy my marriage out of spite. I will drag your name and my mother's and my brother's through the mud. It will be ugly, Grandma, and it will cost you far more than $50,000 in legal fees to defend. She stood there, poised and defiant, believing she still held a card to play. She saw the guitar, the peace, the quiet life I had built, and she thought it was a weakness she could exploit. I walked to the desk in the corner, the same desk where I had first pieced together their scheme. I opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the first page of the irrevocable trust. I am not offering you a proposition, Clara, I said, turning back to her. I am stating a fact. This document places all of my assets, including the liquid capital you so desperately want, into a protected trust. I cannot access the principal, and neither can you. Any legal challenge you mount would be against a legal fortress, not against me. It would be lengthy, expensive, and you would lose. I placed the paper on the table next to her envelope. Your lawsuit would be a financial suicide mission, and we both know you are far too practical for that. Her composure cracked, the confident mask shattered, revealing the raw, furious child beneath. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Walled yourself up in this museum with your money and your self-righteousness. No, I said, looking around the sunlit room. I've simply stopped leaving the doors unlocked for thieves. She snatched the envelope from the table, her hands trembling with rage. You are a cold, heartless woman. You've chosen money over your own flesh and blood. I didn't choose the money, Clara. I chose myself. You and your mother made it clear that was the one thing I wasn't allowed to have. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her chest heaving. The anger seemed to drain out of her all at once, leaving behind a hollowed-out weariness. She looked young and lost, and for a heartbreaking second, I saw the little girl who used to beg me for stories. Without another word, she turned and walked out, closing the door behind her with a soft, final click. I stood in the quiet living room, the echo of her departure fading. There was no victory in it, only the sad, certain knowledge that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. The war was truly, completely over. The last arrow had been shot, and it had fallen harmlessly at my feet. Later that week, I had coffee with David Chen. We met at a small, independent cafe downtown. He was, as before, kind and slightly nervous. I have to confess, he said, stirring a latte, I almost didn't call. I was worried I'd overstepped. You were the only one who didn't, I said, and I told him a little of what had happened. The eviction, the trust, the slow reclaiming of my life. I did not mention Clara's final visit. Some wounds are too fresh to show, even to a friend. He listened, his eyes full of a deep, understanding empathy. He said finally, You remind me of my mother. She always said, You teach people how to treat you by what you allow. It looks like you finally stopped allowing it. We talked for over an hour, not about the past,
but about photography and music and the best places to see the fall foliage. It was easy. It was normal. It was a conversation between two people, not a negotiation between a resource and a user. Walking back to my car, the autumn sun warm on my face, I felt a sense of closure so profound it was almost physical. The path ahead was mine alone to walk, but for the first time, that thought was not daunting. It was exhilarating. I had my home, my peace, my fledgling hobbies, and the quiet, steady certainty that I had saved myself. And that, I knew with every fiber of my being, was worth any price.
Winter settled over Connecticut, a deep and silent blanket that suited my newfound peace. The guitar lessons progressed from painful screeches to recognizable, if simple, melodies. The watercolor class yielded more mud than masterpiece, but the process of mixing colors on the palette, of focusing entirely on the stroke of a brush, was a form of meditation. My world had become smaller, quieter, and infinitely more my own. The holidays approached, a time that had always been an orchestrated frenzy of obligations, of gifts that were expected rather than given, of meals where the tension was as thick as the gravy. This year, there were no lists of demands, no negotiations over who would host. The silence in the house was a gift I gave myself each morning. A week before Christmas, a single slim card arrived in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was Sarah's. I opened it with a sense of detached curiosity, not dread. It was a generic, store-bought holiday card. Inside, she had written only 4 words. "Thinking of you. Mom." It was not an apology. It was not a plea. It was a probe, a tiny, tentative thread cast out to see if there was anything left to grasp. I held the card for a long moment, then placed it in the kindling basket by the fireplace. Some threads are better left severed. On Christmas Eve, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the old neighborhood church for the midnight service. I sat in a back pew, the familiar hymns washing over me, the scent of kine and candle wax stirring memories of Christmases past with Arthur, when the girls were small and the magic was real. The grief was there, a soft, familiar ache, but it was clean. It was not tangled with resentment or anger. After the service, as I was pulling on my gloves in the vestibule, a voice spoke beside me. "Eleanor Vance? I thought that was you." I turned to find Helen, my neighbor, swaddled in a thick scarf. Her eyes were warm, but held a hint of pity. We all heard about what happened with Sarah and Leo. I saw her over the fence a few times, before they moved. It must be so hard being all alone in that big house, especially at Christmas. I looked at her, at the well-meaning concern that was really just a vessel for gossip. I could have offered her a story of lonely despair. It was what she expected. I smiled, a genuine, easy smile that seemed to surprise us both. "It's the most peaceful Christmas I've had in 20 years, Helen. Truly." Her face went briefly blank, then rearranged itself into a confused smile. "Oh, well, that's good. Merry Christmas, Eleanor." "Merry Christmas," I said, and walked out into the crisp, star-dusted night. I spent Christmas Day exactly as I pleased. I made myself eggs and toast. I played my guitar, badly and joyfully. I called David Chen, and we spoke for an hour, sharing simple stories of Christmases past. In the afternoon, I bundled up and took a long walk through the silent, snow-dusted streets. Every house I passed glowed with light, filled with the chaos and joy of family. And for the first time, I felt no envy, no sense of exclusion. Their happiness was theirs. My peace was mine.
It was on one of these walks that I passed the small artisanal bakery on Elm Street. In the window, next to the croissants and sourdough loaves, was a help wanted sign. Weekend counter help wanted, flexible hours. I stood there, my breath pluming in the air, and considered it. Not for the money. The trust saw to it that I would never need money again, but for the simple human interaction, for a reason to leave the house and speak to people who wanted nothing more from me than a coffee and a muffin. The following Saturday, I found myself behind the counter, a crisp white apron tied over my sweater. Annette, the owner, a woman my age with flour in her hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, had hired me on the spot. She said, "You look like you won't put up with any nonsense." It was chaotic and wonderful. I learned the espresso machine, memorized the daily specials, and handled the morning rush with a calm efficiency that surprised me. People came in, ordered their pastries, made small talk about the weather, and left. The transactions were simple, clean, and mutually beneficial. I was Eleanor, the new lady at the bakery, not Grandma, the wallet, or Mom, the pushover. One afternoon, as I was wiping down tables after the lunch crowd, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. Leo's. "Nana, I know I don't have a right to ask, but I lost my job. The apartment is too expensive. I just need a loan. $2,000. I'll pay you back. I promise." I read the message, my hand pausing on the damp cloth. The old instinct stirred. The urge to fix, to rescue, to smooth over the consequences of his own choices. I could almost hear Sarah's voice in my head, coaching him. "Just ask her. She'll cave. She always does." I looked around the warm, fragrant bakery, at Annette, who treated me as an equal, at the customers who saw me as a person, not a resource. I thought of the trust, the guitar, the quiet evenings, the profound, hard-won peace. I typed the single word, "No." Then I blocked the number. There was no guilt. There was only the quiet, solid certainty of a boundary finally made of steel. I was not their safety net anymore. They would sink or swim on their own. And I, for the first time since I could remember, was finally truly free. The story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, and I was just getting started.
The first crocuses pushed through the thawing earth, their purple and yellow heads a defiant announcement of spring. My life had settled into a rhythm that was entirely my own creation. Tuesday and Thursday mornings were for guitar, my fingertips now toughening, forming calluses that were a physical testament to my commitment. Saturdays I worked at the bakery, the bell above the door a cheerful herald of the simple, uncomplicated human connections I found there. It was on a rainy Saturday in April that she walked in. The shop was quiet, the lull between the morning rush and the afternoon coffee crowd. I was refilling the napkin dispensers when the door chimed. I looked up and my hand stilled. It was Clara. She looked different. The sharp, expensive corporate armor was gone. She wore jeans and a simple rain jacket, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked younger and utterly weary. She stood just inside the door, her eyes taking in the small space, before they landed on me standing behind the counter in my flour-dusted apron. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The last time I'd seen her, she was threatening to sue me in my living room. Now she was in a bakery, looking lost. "Grandma," she said, her voice soft, stripped of its usual edge. "Clara?" I didn't smile, but I didn't look away either. "What can I get for you?" She approached the counter slowly, her eyes scanning the pastry case as if it held the answers to a difficult question. Just a black coffee, please."
I turned to the espresso machine, the familiar routine a comfort. I poured the coffee into a ceramic mug and set it on the counter. $2.50. She fumbled in her purse, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and handed them to me. Our fingers didn't touch. She took the mug and stood there holding it, not moving to a table. The rain pattered softly against the window. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her coffee. I got a job. A real one, not in marketing, at a library. It doesn't pay much, but she trailed off, finally looking at me. "I'm living in a studio apartment. It's small. I can afford it." I said nothing, just waited, wiping down the already clean counter. She continued, a faint flush on her cheeks. "I heard you work here. I guess I just wanted to see." She took a shaky breath. "Mom and Leo, they're not talking to me. They blame me for everything, for messing up the plan." Ah, so the coalition had fractured. The schemers had turned on each other. I felt no schadenfreude, only a distant, profound sadness for the toxic ecosystem they had cultivated. The plan was always going to fail, Clara. It was built on a lie. She flinched but nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know that now." She looked around the cozy bakery again. "You look different. You look calm." "I am." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Grandma." The words were barely a whisper, but they hung in the air between us, fragile and real. They weren't a bargaining chip. They were an admission. I looked at my granddaughter, the architect of her own misery, now standing in the rubble. The anger I had clung to for so long had long since burned away, leaving only ashes and this clear-eyed truth. "Thank you for saying that, Clara. But an apology doesn't rebuild trust. That takes time and action." She nodded again, quickly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know. I'm not asking for that. Not yet." She took a final bracing sip of her coffee. "The coffee is good." She set the mug back on the counter, gave me one last unreadable look, and walked out into the rain, disappearing down the slick street. I picked up the mug and took it to the sink. The encounter left me feeling strangely unsettled. A stone dropped into the still pond of my peace. It was the first genuine, unmanipulated emotion I had seen from her in years. It wasn't a performance. It was a surrender. That evening, I sat on my terrace as the storm clouds cleared, leaving a sky washed clean and streaked with pink. The guitar felt familiar in my hands. I thought of Clara, alone in her small apartment. I thought of Sarah and Leo, locked in their shared resentment. I thought of Arthur and the life we had built that was meant to be a legacy, not a loot box.
A legacy. The word resonated. For so long, I had thought of my legacy as the money, the house, the things. But that wasn't what Arthur and I had built. We had built a life of principle, of hard work, of love that was supposed to be a foundation, not a free-for-all. By protecting it all with the trust, by saying no, I hadn't destroyed Arthur's legacy. I had finally honored it. I had ensured that the things we built couldn't be used to fund the petty, grubby schemes that betrayed everything we stood for. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Saw a stunning sunset over the sound. Reminded me of that watercolor you showed me. Hope you're having a peaceful evening. I smiled and typed back. I am. Thank you, David. I looked out at my garden, at the brave crocuses and the budding trees. The past was a closed book, its painful lessons learned. The future was a blank page, and for the first time in decades, I was the only one holding the pen. The story of Eleanor Vance was no longer a tragedy of betrayal.
It was becoming a quiet, steady narrative of resilience. And it was a story I was finally ready to live.
The summer heat arrived, softening the edges of the world with a golden haze. My life had deepened, its roots stretching into this new, fertile ground of my own making. The guitar was no longer a novelty, but a companion. I could play a handful of folk songs from memory, my voice, though wavering, finding a harmony with the strings. At the bakery, I had become a fixture. I knew the regulars by name and their orders by heart. It was a community, small and unassuming, and I was a part of it. One afternoon, David Chen met me after my shift. We had fallen into an easy friendship, built on coffee, shared silence, and a mutual appreciation for the quiet moments life offered. Today, he had his camera slung over his shoulder. "I have a proposition," he said, a shy smile playing on his lips. "There's an art fair in the park. Local artists, some music. I thought you might like to see it." We walked the few blocks to the town green, which was transformed into a tapestry of colorful tents and bustling crowds. It was alive with energy. We wandered through the aisles, admiring pottery, hand-blown glass, and vibrant paintings. It was a world of creation, not destruction, of people building something beautiful with their own hands. We paused at a stall displaying exquisite black and white landscape photography. David chatted easily with the photographer about lenses and light. I watched him, this man who had been the reluctant messenger of my life's upheaval, and felt a profound gratitude. He had handed me a truth that shattered my world, but in doing so, he had given me the tools to rebuild it stronger. As we turned to leave, a voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Nana." I turned. It was Leo. He was standing by a food truck, holding a paper boat of fries. He looked different. The perpetual scowl was gone, replaced by a look of stunned uncertainty. He was thinner, and he stood straighter. He was alone. "Leo," I said, my voice neutral. David glanced between us, sensing the history thick in the air. I'll go grab us some lemonade," he said, tactfully, and melted into the crowd. Leo approached slowly. "I didn't know you came to things like this." I said, "There are a lot of things you didn't know about me." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. He nodded, looking down at his fries. "I guess so." He shuffled his feet. I got a new job in construction. It's hard work, but it's okay." "I'm glad to hear it," I said, and I found that I meant it. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time in years. The anger was gone from his gaze, replaced by a weary clarity. "Mom's not doing so good. She's angry all the time. At you, at Clara, at me." He took a breath. "It's exhausting." I said nothing. I had spent decades carrying the weight of Sarah's discontent. It was no longer my burden to bear. "I'm sorry, Nana," he said, the words simple and stark. For everything. For the way I acted, for the things I said, for the canisters." The apology was clumsy, unpracticed, and for that very reason, it felt more real than any of Sarah's polished performances or Clara's strategic concessions. It was the apology of a man who was finally, belatedly, growing up. "Thank you, Leo," I said. He nodded, a look of profound relief washing over his face, as if a physical weight had been lifted. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to explain or justify. He just stood there, bearing witness to his own accountability. I should go," he said. "It was good to see you, Nana." "You too, Leo." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of people. David returned a moment later, holding 2 cups of lemonade. He handed one to me, without a word, his eyes full of a quiet understanding. We found a bench under a large oak tree and sat, watching the world go by. The sun was warm, the lemonade tart and sweet. The encounter with Leo had left me not with turmoil, but with a sense of quiet finality. It was an ending and a possible beginning all at once.
Later that evening, back in the sanctuary of my home, I reflected on the day. Clara's surrender in the bakery, Leo's awkward apology in the park. They were finding their way in the world I had forced them to enter, a world where I was no longer their safety net. They were being shaped by consequence, and for the first time, I could see the faintest outlines of the people they might become, once stripped of the enabling and the entitlement. I picked up my guitar and began to play, a slow, simple melody that filled the room. The house was silent, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the music I chose to make, the peace I had fought for, the life I had reclaimed. The long, painful journey had begun with a photographer's call, a whisper of a disturbing truth. It had led me through a valley of betrayal and manipulation, forcing me to confront the people I loved most and the woman I had allowed myself to become. I had drawn lines in the sand, built legal fortresses, and weathered their storms. And now, on the other side, I had found something I never knew I was missing: myself. Not Eleanor, the grandmother, the mother, the bank, just Eleanor. A woman who played guitar badly, who served coffee with a smile, who valued her peace, and who had discovered that the greatest legacy she could leave was not an inheritance of things, but an example of strength. The story was over. My life, my true life, had finally begun, and every new day was a page I was eager to write. It was on a rainy Saturday in April that she walked in. The shop was quiet, the lull between the morning rush and the afternoon coffee crowd. I was refilling the napkin dispensers when the door chimed. I looked up and my hand stilled. It was Clara. She looked different. The sharp, expensive corporate armor was gone. She wore jeans and a simple rain jacket, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked younger and utterly weary. She stood just inside the door, her eyes taking in the small space before they landed on me, standing behind the counter in my flour-dusted apron. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The last time I'd seen her, she was threatening to sue me in my living room. Now she was in a bakery, looking lost. "Grandma?" she said, her voice soft, stripped of its usual edge. "Clara." I didn't smile, but I didn't look away either. "What can I get for you?" She approached the counter slowly, her eyes scanning the pastry case, as if it held the answers to a difficult question. Just a black coffee, please." I turned to the espresso machine, the familiar routine a comfort. I poured the coffee into a ceramic mug and set it on the counter. $2.50. She fumbled in her purse, pulled out a few crumpled bills and handed them to me. Our fingers didn't touch. She took the mug and stood there, holding it, not moving to a table. The rain pattered softly against the window. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her coffee. I got a job, a real one, not in marketing, at a library. It doesn't pay much, but..." She trailed off, finally looking at me. I'm living in a studio apartment. It's small. I can afford it. I said nothing, just waited, wiping down the already clean counter. You heard you work here, she continued, a faint flush on her cheeks. I guess I just wanted to see. She took a shaky breath. Mom and Leo, they're not talking to me. They blame me for everything, for messing up the plan. Ah, so the coalition had fractured. The schemers had turned on each other. I felt no schadenfreude, only a distant, profound sadness for the toxic ecosystem they had cultivated. The plan was always going to fail, Clara, I said, my voice even. It was built on a lie. She flinched, but nodded, her eyes glistening. I know that now. She looked around the cozy bakery again. You look different. You look calm. I am. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Grandma. The words were barely a whisper, but they hung in the air between us, fragile and real. They weren't a bargaining chip. They were an admission. I looked at my granddaughter, the architect of her own misery, now standing in the rubble. The anger I had clung to for so long had long since burned away, leaving only ashes and this clear-eyed truth.
Thank you for saying that, Clara, I said. But an apology doesn't rebuild trust. That takes time and action. She nodded again, quickly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I know. I'm not asking for that. Not yet. She took a final, bracing sip of her coffee. The coffee is good. She set the mug back on the counter, gave me one last, unreadable look, and walked out into the rain, disappearing down the slick street. I picked up the mug and took it to the sink. The encounter left me feeling strangely unsettled. A stone dropped into the still pond of my peace. It was the first genuine, unmanipulated emotion I had seen from her in years. It wasn't a performance. It was a surrender. That evening, I sat on my terrace as the storm clouds cleared, leaving a sky washed clean and streaked with pink. The guitar felt familiar in my hands. I thought of Clara, alone in her small apartment. I thought of Sarah and Leo, locked in their shared resentment. I thought of Arthur and the life we had built that was meant to be a legacy, not a loot box. A legacy. The word resonated. For so long, I had thought of my legacy as the money, the house, the things. But that wasn't what Arthur and I had built. We had built a life of principle, of hard work, of love that was supposed to be a foundation, not a free-for-all. By protecting it all with the trust, by saying no, I hadn't destroyed Arthur's legacy. I had finally honored it. I had ensured that the things we built couldn't be used to fund the petty, grubby schemes that betrayed everything we stood for. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Saw a stunning sunset over the sound. Reminded me of that watercolor you showed me. Hope you're having a peaceful evening. I smiled and typed back, I am. Thank you, David. I looked out at my garden, at the brave crocuses and the budding trees. The past was a closed book, its painful lessons learned. The future was a blank page, and for the first time in decades, I was the only one holding the pen.
The story of Eleanor Vance was no longer a tragedy of betrayal. It was becoming a quiet, steady narrative of resilience. And it was a story I was finally ready to live.